Tell you what, price of petrol's really going up. Might even say the price is a bit stiff.
Nope. Nope.
When you think of classic rom-coms from the late 80s or early 90s, Pretty Woman is one of those that gets mentioned. I don't have much history with the film. I remember it being on TV once and I watched about half of it before switching off. That was a long time ago though, and my tastes have changed quite a lot since then. Going into this one, I'm reminded of Dirty Dancing, a rom-com around about the same era that I ended up loving. So let's see if the same applies here. Here's my review of Pretty Woman. Edward Lewis is a very wealthy man who buys companies in financial difficulty, breaks them up and sells them off piece by piece. At a cocktail party, he decides that he's bored and borrows his lawyer Philip's Lotus to head to Beverly Hills. He gets lost downtown and asks for directions from prostitute Vivian, who agrees to show him how to get to Beverly Hills for $20. They arrive at his hotel and after a quick back and forth, he agrees to use her services. Initially for the $100 per hour rate she quotes, but then for $300 for her to stay the night. In the penthouse, Edward is not in a hurry to move things along, but the two do end up sleeping together. The next morning, Edward proposes that Vivian stay with him for the week whilst he's in Los Angeles, and accompany him to social events as well as stay the night, whilst he works on his next huge business acquisition. Vivian agrees for $3,000. Edward then gives her money for more upscale clothes, but Vivian has difficulty getting the service she needs as Rodeo Drive boutiques all look down on her. With the help of Barnard, the hotel manager who's very understanding to the hotel's special customers, Vivian learns about dinner etiquette and is able to get a cocktail dress for the evening. After a disastrous meeting with Jim Morris and his grandson David, who own the company Edward wants to buy, Edward takes Vivian back to Rodeo Drive the next day to go on a shopping spree where she is fawned over and spoiled thanks to Edward's credit card. The next day at a polo event, Philip suspects that Vivian is working for the Morris' company, but Edward confides that she is a hooker. Philip laughs at this and later suggests to Vivian that he hire her after Edward is done with her. Vivian and Edward argue that night and Vivian asks for her money so she can leave. Edward leaves the money out but Vivian leaves it behind. The two make up and the next night, Edward takes Vivian to San Francisco via private jet to the opera, her first one which she ends up loving. Back at the hotel, the two sleep together again, but this time Vivian breaks her own rule about not kissing clients on the lips, and later, when she thinks he's asleep, she tells him she loves him. The next morning, Edward offers to keep Vivian in an apartment and make sure she is taken care of so he can see her again when he visits LA. But Vivian wants more, she wants to be with Edward. Edward has to leave to meet the Morrises with whom he's had a change of heart. He now wants to help their company and stop it being broken apart. Jim is delighted as he's owned the company for 40 years and his biggest concern was the workers rather than himself. Philip on the other hand is furious and blames Vivian. He goes to see her at the hotel and assaults her, with Edward arriving to save the day and kick Philip out. Edward pays Vivian and the two part, with Vivian now planning to leave LA to go to San Francisco, while Edward is heading back to New York. On the way to the airport, Edward stops by Vivian's apartment and despite his fear of heights, climbs the fire escape to be with Vivian. I'm going to start by saying that my opinion of Pretty Woman has changed somewhat. Seeing the film from start to finish and really paying attention to it, it's not half bad. Is it something I can recommend? I'm not so sure. The story is really simple, uncomplicated and does what it needs to. A simple Pygmalion plotline of two people from different worlds meeting by happenstance and falling for each other. It's only when you add the layers to this that it starts to get a bit shaky. The business merger storyline is a solid enough story to show the change of character of Edward, with Philip representing what Edward was and always has been before. Philip, by the way, is a really slimy piece of work and played brilliantly by Jason Alexander. When he suggests that he hires Vivian after Edward has finished with her, his wife is at the same event. Not to mention, of course, the assault on Vivian later. He really does get his comeuppance later on, and you get behind Edward when he hits Philip and breaks his nose. Vivian should have had more interaction with her roommate Kit though, in my opinion. She could have been her second to show her growth when Edward wasn't there. Kit and Edward never meet, and I feel that's a missed opportunity. This isn't to say Vivian's character is stale though, quite the opposite. I feel this is her story and Edward is the catalyst for change. Julia Roberts playing Vivian is so good, a really strong, well-rounded performance in a role that could have been phoned in. It's no surprise she was nominated for an Oscar that year for Best Actress, the only nomination for the film overall. She lost out to Kathy Bates in Misery, which, yeah, fair enough. I can't say the same for Richard Gere though as Edward. I get that Edward is a cold, calculating man who goes for the jugular until he changes thanks to Vivian, but so many times it just looks like Gere is going through the motions. The only time we see proper emotion from him is when he fights Philip and when he goes to see Vivian at the end.
Hey, now he emotes!
This kind of leads me to my biggest issue with the story though. I don't think it's very romantic. It has a similar but not as glaring a problem as 50 Shades of Grey, in that Edward's money changes everything. Does Vivian even give Edward the time of day if Edward wasn't obscenely rich? Would she have even stayed the night if he was staying at a travel lodge? Would she have fallen in love if he didn't have the means to take her to San Francisco on a private jet while she wears a $250,000 necklace? That necklace was legitimate, by the way. An armed security guard escorted that thing around the set and never let it out of his sight. Now, I'm not saying that Vivian doesn't develop true feelings for Edward, but it's hard to argue based on what the film shows us that money wasn't a huge factor in the initial attraction. Hell, if Edward had a $10 bill instead of a $20 bill, the film would have ended when Vivian asked for $10 for directions. This is what I meant earlier when I stated that adding layers to the base storyline makes it a bit shaky. Oh, and just in case you think the comparison to 50 Shades is unfair, the top 2 results on IMDb for Rich Man, Poor Girl rom-coms are 50 Shades and Pretty Woman. I didn't search with Safe Search off for Rich Man, Poor Girl. Moving on to the rest of the film, Pretty Woman is well paced, well directed, and doesn't waste its 2-hour length. Initially, I thought it too long, but then I tried to look at what I'd cut, and I don't think there's anything that isn't necessary. If you cut some of the boardroom scenes, then you miss Edward's development. If you cut Vivian shopping or being taught etiquette by Barnard, then you miss her development. And you certainly can't cut the scene of her shopping on Rodeo Drive, partly because this underpins the whole subtle social narrative about not judging a book by its cover and how society as a whole conforms to the capitalist model to a T, giving the rich all the advantages whilst the poor struggle on, but mostly it's because there's a beautiful Monopoly set in the window. Weirdly, Philip also mentions he loved Monopoly as a kid in a throwaway piece of dialogue. 10 out of 10 movie. Let's talk soundtrack now. There aren't many tracks which get used in the film itself. Wild Women Do is kind of forgettable, Pretty Woman by Roy Orbison obviously, but they used It Must Have Been Love by Roxette, and I love this song. Hell, writing this review has got me listening to Roxette again. Pretty Woman has an interesting history with a lot of actors and actresses in line for the roles of Edward and Vivian respectively, such as Christopher Reeve, Kevin Kline, Denzel Washington and Burt Reynolds for Edward, as well as Molly Ringwald, Drew Barrymore, Uma Thurman and Winona Ryder for Vivian, all of which didn't pan out for various reasons. The film was a huge success though, making $463.4 million on a $14 million budget, and is generally considered to be an all-time classic romantic comedy, which is also surprisingly popular in Spain for some reason. The film's status means that of course they did a musical version of it. Initially released in 2018, it's currently set to tour the UK between 2023 and 2024. Pretty Woman is a film I have a hard time pinning down an opinion on. I can see why it's so popular, but at the same time, what stands out to me is the fact that money plays such a major part in the story, which detracts from the romantic aspect of the film. Otherwise, it's sweet, heartwarming, funny, and generally a good time, with a very good performance by Julia Roberts. Overall, I do recommend Pretty Woman as a date night film with some feel-good moments. Pretty Woman, don't walk on by this one. Thank you for making it this far. If you like what you see, please feel free to give this video a like and share it around. Maybe leave a comment below about what you thought of this video. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel so you can get notified when I upload new videos. If you'd like to support me in other ways, you can buy merchandise at bradleyj.tmail.com, where you can buy t-shirts and tote bags. Or you can become a patron at www.patreon.com/BradleyJVoices for just £1 a month. Coming up next for the Film Review Open Challenge is 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri. For now though, thank you very much for watching.